Okay, today I get to speak to somebody that's kind of new to me. I actually feel like I know a little bit about him. His name's Abraham Ingle. He runs the company AI Synthesis, which is a cool little DIY shop that's making some really neat modules. The reason I feel like I kind of know him is because he recently was interviewed on the Podular Modcast. There'll be a link to it on the site. It's a cool little, really modular focused podcast. And so while I knew of his work preceding that, I kind of felt like I got to know a little bit about him. And so he talks there a lot about the modules and stuff, but we're going to talk about maybe a broader set of things today. So I've already talked enough. Let's talk to Abraham. Hey, Abraham, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
I am great. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. We were actually scheduled to talk last week, but I had one of these like pervasive internet outages that can sometimes happen. I swear, man, it was weird. I felt like after 3 days of no internet, we were almost back to like pioneer days, man. It was like the kids started playing guitar and stuff like that. I was like, pretty soon we're going to sit around a fire and like talk about, what things were like when we were kids.
Yeah, we tell Star Wars.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Star Wars becomes an oral history again. Mm-hmm. So let's start off this discussion by talking a little bit about you and your work. Why don't you fill in the listeners a little bit about what AI Synthesis is all about?
Yes, AI Synthesis is my little company. It's basically the company that I wish existed back when I was getting obsessed with modular synths in the late 90s. At that time, it was very limited what was out there. You had Dopefur and probably some other DIY companies operating, but the level of entry was really, really high and complicated. And I had these really old books that I was getting from the Evergreen State Library about, how to build a synth, and all the parts were wildly outdated and there was no way to actually do it. So I was just dreaming at that time, but I started getting interested in DIY and modular synths and all that. But it wasn't until many, many years later that the opportunity fell in my lap to really take a risk and get into it. And then once I did and circuits worked, I said, oh man, this is amazing. And I've got to share this with people. So I made a business to help do that.
Yeah, and it's a really cool business because in addition to making modules, you actually go out of your way to be a bit of an educator. The way that you do your build instructions are like clear as day. It leaves very little room for interpretation. You just make it so that it's really clear what you're doing. And it puts people in a position to have a high likelihood of success, right?
Yeah, and I mean, that's two-part. One, there's nothing better than when a module turns on after you build it, or anything you build. Like if you don't have to do any troubleshooting, that just feels amazing.
Right.
So I definitely want that. Two, it cuts down on the support, which is great. And then, three, I'm self-taught. I don't have any EE or anything like that. So there's always, when you're self-taught at anything, there's always weird little nooks and crannies of knowledge that you have missing because you kind of cheated your way there by doing instead of reading first. And so, a lot of the times, and I go back and forth on like how much is too much, but I'll try, especially on the early modules, like the mixer, for instance, of like saying, these are your input resistors and this is why they're there. And that not only gives the builder a little bit of knowledge as to why they're doing this, because other than that, it's just Legos for adults, but it also forces me to, dig into my own circuits where, if I was doing this for just myself, I'd be happy once they worked. But since other people are building them, I want to take that extra step and say, this is kind of why it works too. Although I don't go too heavy on that in the build guide, because otherwise the build guide would be 8 pages long, and it only takes an hour to build the thing. So yeah. it's a balance.
What you say though is that this kind of like the perspective that you have from being self-taught kind of informs you about the kind of things that you can help people out with. One of the things that I actually really love, and the thing that I wish would have been around when I first started messing around with circuits, is your list of, hey, go buy these tools, and sort of like pointers to which exact ones to buy. Yeah. I can't tell you the number of like stupid purchases I made, either tools that I bought because they seemed like they'd be a good idea and were never used, or conversely, the wire stripper from hell that I saved 45 cents on and didn't work a whit, So I have to say that stuff like that ends up being like super informative to people that are just getting their feet on the ground.
Yeah, thank you. I definitely hope it does that. It's that stuff and the articles that I put up in I think it's called DIY guide section, where I just put up guides that have usually nothing to do with my product. A lot of that stuff is just, I'll get, I'll be on a forum or on although I'm on everything less these days because I'm on a diet, social media diet, but I would be in a place where people who are trying to learn come and, you see the same questions every week, and it's the exact same question. So I was like, hey, I'm just going to write it once and then I can link to it.
Sure.
And then, if you learn something, then maybe you think I'm a nice guy and that's good for my brand. And then everyone learns something and everyone's happy. So, yeah, I mean, I was also thinking when I started the business, like it's a weird mission / business because even though I'm trying to make it as easy as possible, there is still, I know, a perceived very high barrier of entry. So it's just about like, where can I knock those down? Like, oh, the tools, that's a thing. Well, okay, here's the tools. Oh, well, what about this? Well, here's this. So, if I can check all those boxes, then I can get people who've never built anything to build things. And that's super empowering.
It is. Well, the other thing I noticed is that you actually do a lot of sort of practical stuff. I was kind of surprised because like your discussion about, hey, get a soldering iron, it has like get a nice one. And I look and sure enough, it's that nice Weller that I love so much, right?
Yep.
But then also you have, or get a cheap one, and you go and you have a pointer to a $13 one, which is great. Because the fact of the matter is, not everybody is in a financial position to say, okay, I'm going to dump $100 on something that I'm not even sure that I'm going to like.
Right. Especially with DIY, because most of the time, I mean, the way I started in was as a way to save money.
Right.
So, if you're just saying buy the best thing, it's like, well, yeah, I've been doing DIY for years and years and I like the Weller and it's great. And I think if you are going to do a lot of DIY, you should get that Weller because you'll love it.
Right.
But, if you're just starting off and you're like, well, I'm broke and really I just wanted to make a guitar pedal for cheaper than I could buy it for, then it's like, yeah, buy the $13 one. It'll frustrate you sometimes, but you can get the job done. And if you do more stuff, then you can upgrade.
Right. And throwing away that $13 isn't going to kill you at that point.
No.
Right. So, I'm a little curious because you dropped a nugget there that I think is really important, which is that you got into the DIY and actually the whole modular market thing. You got into it not because it looked like a marketplace, but because you were broke and you wanted a modular synth. And I'm kind of curious because that's an interesting combination.
It's a very common combination.
Yeah, it is. It seems that way. But also, I mean, what is it about? I mean, you got into it before modular was a thing. I think some of the reason why that's a common thing now is because people see a lot of artists using modular systems and are like, oh man, I got to do that, right? But if you got started in the late 90s, that was a very different time. Modular was sort of like kind of dead and buried and was just starting to come back around.
Yeah, you just had the early seeds of Dope Fur and then some of the ugliest websites you've ever seen.
Oh, yeah. Well, and synth tech started showing up. I was working with Grant Richter on the Wired system at the time, and that was just starting to kind of come online. But man, I remember EM did a thing like, hey, modulars are kind of coming back. And, you know, it was like a 2-page article because there wasn't that much to talk about, you know?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I was going to college at the time, and at least at the time, Evergreen had some Buchlas and some ARP 2600s. And, you know, the late 90s musically was a time when analog as a sound was coming back, and you had, I mean, Stereolab and Air, French band, and, you know, a bunch of other, you know, Chemical Brothers were like, we use analog synths, and they had been pretty much gone too, just in general in the 90s. Like, there weren't a lot of them, and then you start to see the VAs, and now, you know, analogs are everywhere. So yeah, I was just obsessed with analog synths. I had a Juno 60 at the time, and like an Alesis, and I was just constantly, I was also a guitar player, a failed guitar player. So, you know, it started with pedals. I think it starts with pedals for a lot of us. And, you know, I was just obsessed with like, oh, you know, what if this pedal had like this knob, or what if I can control this, or what if I could sync up all of these rates on my pedal board, and but still have it be, you know, analog pedals or interesting pedals, and not just like one big huge multi-effect box and stuff like that. Like, how do I not dive through menus and just have the hands-on control that I wanted? Yeah, that's when I became obsessed. But I didn't actually get a modular until I think it was 2011 or 13 or something in there was actually when I got my first modular.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I'd never had one. I had a couple semi-modular pieces, but my early DIY days were pretty stunted because I didn't have the level of education that was needed to be able to take advantage of the resources that were there at the time.
Oh, okay.
And I was also building pretty much everything on perf board that I would get from Radio Shack. And what I later learned when I bought my modular is that I'm just really bad at perf board, and I can't. It's true. Even now when I prototype, I never use perf board because I'm terrible at it. Everything I build on perf board either doesn't work or works for a little bit and then it breaks. Say that what you will about my soldering technique, maybe. All I know is me and perf board don't get along. So a lot of my early trial and errors were pretty errors. And even when they worked, and I'd build simple little oscillators or like Lunetta circuits, like, oh, this is cool. And then, you know, one day it just wouldn't work, and I'd put it in a box full of repair stuff that would never get touched, and actually stopped doing any DIY for a number of years. And then I bought this guy, this kind of dad guy, he had a bunch of kids, was selling his no format modular synthesizer that he had built out of like various metal panels that he got for free from his work. And they were all Music from Outer Space circuits, which is still a great circuit. Rest in peace, Ray. And so there were all those circuits just put into these weird panels, and he was selling not only his modular, which was in like 75 to 90% working order, but he was also selling his his hobby, his electronics hobby. So when I bought that synthesizer, I also bought parts. I bought some circuit boards. I bought a bunch of stuff came with it. I think it had probably some wire strippers and probably some cutters, and it might have had a soldering iron, although I don't think so, because I think I ended up buying the iron. But suddenly I had a bunch of parts, and I had a Music from Outer Space Wavefreaker PCB that had never been used before. And I thought, screw it, I'm gonna buy a soldering iron and give this a shot. And then it worked, and I was like, oh wow, that's the first, like, I just built a module, that's crazy. And then I went through and started fixing up the other modules that came with the system, and then gradually transferred those into nice bride chamber boards with, I think, are at Synth now, so that it looked like a really nice 5U setup. And I still have it, and I actually have quite a big 5U setup in addition to Eurorack. And the great thing about MFOS is that it's 12 volts, so it all works with your Eurorack system on the same power supply.
Oh, sure.
So that's when it started. And then once I learned how easy like that I could actually build a thing. And at this point, I was not really I don't think much more skilled than any beginner. Like I had some experience, but not much. And a lot of that experience was frustrating and half failures. So at that point, I started doing this build 3, sell 2 thing, which I have somewhere in my DIY guides thing.
Yeah, you talk about it on the site. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I literally, like, sometimes people say, "Oh, I want to get into DIY," and some people say, "Oh, you won't actually save any money with DIY." I actually made quite a bit of money on DIY just at that time without running a business per se. I would just make some modules and keep one and sell the other 2 and get that profit. And the Apollo I'm recording in today was bought using that money. And then after I did that, I was just getting so obsessed with building and like, oh, I should write a better guide to how to build this thing because this thing is great, but it's not a good guide, and like It's so frustrating, and it required 8 emails because these parts are wrong, and it just kind of started surfacing like, I think I should start a business, and I did.
Right. It's this idea of in the way you talk about it on your site is like build 3, sell 2. It's that literally was sort of like your nascent business plan to get started. But it's interesting. You didn't start because you were a builder. You started because you're a musician. Do you still play out?
Oh yeah. I haven't played out in a little bit because we just moved, but
I'm in the same spot, by the way. There's something about relocation that'll really screw with your playing schedule.
It really does. I mean, I still actually, like, this weekend, like right now I only have 2 of my modular racks hooked up, and there's another one over there. But yeah, I make music as forcedamage.com.
Oh, okay.
Or I make music as Force Damage. It's at forcedamage.com. That's silly. But yeah, free albums on Bandcamp and stuff. Yeah, I still absolutely make music. I make a ton of music. That's one rule I had, because having been a builder for a long time, like 4 years before I started the business, you would kind of see a life cycle that happens a lot where people start a business, they put out some cool circuits, and then after a year or 2 or more, they stop doing the DIY part because there's too much support, or
right.
It's honestly kind of a lot easier too, just to make some prefab boards and just, do the shipping stuff. And people say, oh, I got to make music. So that's one rule I made for myself, was like, I could always stop doing business and make music. I have time to ship orders, so I could do that part. But, people are always hounding me like, when's this module coming out? When's this module coming out? And, it'll come out when it comes out. But,
right.
If I end up not making music because I feel an obligation to put out a module, then I haven't really succeeded.
Right.
And I've failed. So I definitely need to keep that part alive.
Well, I think especially you got a chance to be a little bit on the front lines, because you saw, especially coming from the 5U world, you would have seen some people literally take that track of like starting off as kit builders, and like all of a sudden the kit thing gets to be hard. I think an awful lot of people in the early 2000s really got into synth and synth DIY stuff based off of Synth Tech and the modem, which was originally Module of the Month Club stuff.
Yep.
And that was an important part of the process. But, Paul just hit the wall of being like, bagging resistors got to be something that he just couldn't handle doing anymore. What is it that you do that allows that to remain sort of still a bit of joy for you?
One, I think, is staying a little bit small. So that it doesn't take over my life.
Right.
I think that's a part of it. But honestly, another part of it is, so I say I'm on a social media diet. That is totally true with the exception of Instagram. Because Instagram, and I'm super late to Instagram. So I'm very like old man about Instagram because I was such a late adopter, because I'm like, I don't use any social media. I don't like any social media. I'm certainly not going to use Instagram. And then I got on it, and I can see people tagging me, my company, AI Synthesis, which is, they're my initials. It's me. You talk smack about my company, you talk smack about me. But, they tag me and they post up their little jams. And it's amazing because it's like, oh, yeah, yesterday when I went into the studio, I made garbage. But yesterday when he went in, he made something great. And he made it with like my stuff. That's awesome. And that is such a completely amazing feeling and experience. And it's like, I never thought that would even be a part of it when I started this, but that actually keeps me going in a huge way because it's just amazing to see people make things with, something they made that is your thing that you helped put in the world. It's just really cool.
Right. Now, when people talk about there being a lot of sort of like support involved in the DIY world, what does that realistically mean for you? Does that mean like every night you have to sit down and answer a whole ton of email, or is it like once in a while people are a little confused, or they have something that doesn't work and they want to ship it to you? What does that look like in the DIY world? I mean, in the commercial thing, it's like I get a module, it doesn't work, I send it back to somebody, and then I shit on them all over social media, right? That's the process, right? It's a well understood process. What's that like in DIY?
So luckily not too much shitting on me on social media, which is nice.
That is nice. Although you're on a social media diet, so how would you know?
Well, yeah. Either way, don't do it, or it hurts my feelings. So I do get, it's not every day. It's definitely not every day. That might change my outlook. But I mean, so again, part of designing the circuits and having the guides is like, there are all the things that I got annoyed with when I was building beforehand. It's all kind of tried to be fixed. So I'm pretty sure I get less support than your average DIY company as far as requests go. When I do get a request, I listen to what they say, and I usually ask for high-res pictures of the front and back of each board. There's never any wiring on any of my designs because I hate wiring, and it's where most of the errors happen. So taking out wiring, it means that I can look at something visually and usually spot like, oh, that looks like a cold solder joint over there, or this might be the wrong part, double check this, and try and figure it out that way. And that works a lot with usually not too much needed in between. If that doesn't work, I have a secret. Are you familiar with Bifaco modules?
Oh, yeah, sure.
So they have a product or an offering called I believe it's called the Happy Ending Kit. Yeah. Where basically it's you pay a flat fee and ship your module to them and they fix it and send it back to you. Okay. I have that, but it's a secret, meaning it's just not on my site. So I don't ever want to leave anyone behind, and it takes me an hour to build anything. Mm-hmm. So, and I've actually only had to do that twice now over the 2 years. Usually we are able to sort it out in 1 or 2 emails. But if I can't explain what's going on, or if sometimes there's a language barrier because via Thonk, I sell a lot to Europe these days. Right. So sometimes there's just a language barrier and I just can't figure it out, from what they're saying. I shouldn't say this. In the case of Europe, I'll just be like, keep your module, I'm going to send you a new one. Oh, right. And then they end up with 2. And in the States, I'll usually have them send it to me. Right. But I'm trying to figure out how to normalize that as a product and put it on the site, because I think it's probably a good thing to market and tell people about, but I haven't figured out a good way to police the costs or whatever, because obviously I don't want people buying, the cheap version, which would be like a PCB or the PCB in a panel. Right. And then, getting a deal to have me build it for them when, I offer built and tested modules. So if that's all people want, I want them to buy that. I don't want them to be sneaky about it. So I'm still trying to figure out how to figure that out, but we do that too.
Right. Interesting. So in addition to making circuit boards and selling them and sending stuff around the world and helping people get their builds made, you also are having to do the design work. And building a module is one thing, designing is another. And, I had a little experience designing some circuits, mainly behind doing the Ardcore system. Yeah. And it was a fascinating process to go through, and it was very rewarding to do it. But at the same time, I really needed some people to help. And I remember, that was still when I was getting along with Grant Richter, and I would call in and I'd be like, man, I finally figured out how op amps work, but, I can use any resistors are just a ratio, and I can use any resistors. How do I know what to use? And I remember him saying, use 1,000. And if 1,000 doesn't work, use 10,000 and start off with that, right? And I was like, what a brilliant, one sentence way of talking about how you start the process of doing some design, right? Mm-hmm. Who are some of the people that helped you out in the process of learning to become a designer?
Yeah, so 2 big ones. First one is a guy named Charlie who blogs as Charlie Sagitronix, and I think he's got sagitronix.blogspot.com. And he actually was initially going to be my business partner. He was going to be the business partner as the brains behind it because he is an EE and he does go to school for that, and he can design circuits if I think of a thing. But then that didn't work out. We still have a good relationship. He just didn't want to go into business.
Got it.
In modules. So it's like, okay, cool. So then I had to do it myself. The second person is a person, I call him my mentor. I'm not sure if he would go reverse, but that's Dave Brown of modularsynthesis.com. He is a brilliant man and a good man. And he, if I'm ever super stuck, he will help me figure out why this PCB doesn't work. For me, the hardest part is the PCB design. Because it's through hole. I would love to do more SMT stuff, but there's various reasons why I don't. There's kind of like an age thing about it, where it's super easy for young people, and for most people, most people should not be afraid of most SMD or SMT work, as long as it's that kind of larger size. Right. You probably will have a high degree of success, but a lot of people who are a little bit older, really, they actually can't do it. Their hands move too much, and so anyway, and also it scares new people. Right. So it's kind of against my whole, I don't want to say brand, but essentially. So through-hole PCB is really hard because you're drilling through it all the time instead of just laying stuff on top of it. So that stuff's really complicated, and it takes a huge, what I call brain RAM, which is just, that if you put down a PCB design project for a week and then try and come back to it, good luck. Right. Because you had, I keep a lot of notes, a lot of notes, but still, I would still, I guarantee that PCB won't work when I get it back. And you can pass all the checks you want. I know that it won't work because there's just a bunch of little things to remember, label this, do this, flip these caps, or else the PCBs won't fit together right, because with through-hole, you're probably going to have to do a sandwich, 2 boards stuck together. So anyway, the short answer to your question is Dave Brown and Charlie. At this point, I rely on that less. I've gotten a lot better at utilizing the kind of building blocks that are used in modules, inverters and op amps, and how to put those together to do what I want.
It's interesting though, because the other thing is there's sort of another weird process which involves part selection. So it's one thing for help with design, and a lot of times that's people, right? Yeah. You get people that can help you with things like, hey, use 1,000, and if that doesn't work, use 10,000, right? Right. But the other thing is there's kind of the weird world of part selection. Yep. And I think as a DIY builder, when you get a kit, it's this is just a couple of resistors and these 4 chips. who couldn't do this? Well,
Right.
the fact of the matter is, unless you're just doing exactly what everyone else did, even like finding the right chip to do the thing can actually be kind of a blistering process, right? I remember, like, again, for the hardcore thing, finding a DAC that would do what I wanted it to at the speed that I wanted it to. It was a really ugly situation. And all of a sudden then you're in that whole thing of like, well, not only do I have to like know how to get the data sheets for these chips, I have to know how to read them and how to look at the like example circuits and make frickin' heads or tails out of any of it.
Exactly. Now, one thing that Dave Brown says a lot, which I think is really important to understand about design, electronic design, and PCB design, is that a schematic is only a concept.
Right.
It's not a board. And when you actually have a board, there's a lot of other things involved that have nothing to do with what resistors go into what inputs. It's about, is there proper spacing for this? Or is there too much tension on a capacitor because the widths aren't right? Are the numberings correct? Like there's so much stuff. Like you say with that part selection, it's translating a notion into the real world. And like, yeah, okay, it's an op amp and some resistors. Why did I buy this kit? Well, go to Mouser and see how many TL072s there are.
Right.
Which one do you want to buy? Tell me which one is right,
Right.
It is daunting for a new person to do that. I do encourage the sourcing of unknowns parts. And we always link to, the exact part to buy in the bombs of the build guide so that, it's fairly easy to source your own parts. And I try to, like, I haven't done anything with Vactrols yet, for instance, because I know that that's just going to be a headache for people.
Sourcing headache, right.
Yeah. So like, there's a lot of things that I probably won't ever put out just because it's hard to source those parts. And if I can't help you get them at, in 1 or 2 orders, then, I try for 1 order for 1 shopping cart. So I try to make it so someone can get everything from TADOT because the parts are inexpensive, and for DIY, for what we're doing, it's a fairly I know it's audio and it's precious, but they actually are fairly non-critical operations when we're talking about analog mixers and stuff. So, and their 1% resistors are just as good as any other. So, I try to make everything with 1 shopping cart, but if you get into some of these builds, I was looking at a module, someone was like, hey, you should build, a version of this. And I looked at it and had a bunch of different Vactrols, some hard to find ICs. And I was like, absolutely not. No way. Because for me to try and build kits, like, trying to get 100, 200 of those in quantity together is going to be a nightmare.
Right. Well, I was kind of looking over your guides, and you actually use, real common parts. So you're probably not in the unfortunate position of some where you're going to end up having to, like, discontinue products because the parts are unavailable. I mean, you use some really straightforward stuff.
Yeah, I try. I mean, I try to make it so that, if you've been doing it a couple of years, you can probably build a mixer out of what you have laying around. Yeah, hunting down esoteric parts is a nightmare, and, getting a weird chip from eBay and then your module doesn't work and you don't know if it's because you did something wrong or if because you have a counterfeit chip. That's not fun. And I don't want anyone to have to deal with that because it's just too confusing. Who knows what to do in that situation?
Right. Now you talk on your site, and you've mentioned before that you actually started off in the large format, the 5U style systems, and in fact that's still kind of the format that you love, and I understand that. I had my start was in 5U. I had a really nice combo unit. I had a lot of .com, but I also had a fair amount of Moon Modular. I had a bunch of Moon Modular stuff and a little of the Club of the Knobs stuff. I loved it, but it also was like the size of a trailer house. So when I made a move, I also had to pare down, and I went down to a much smaller Euro-based system. But I kind of missed that because there was a physicality in using it that I really loved. But also, when I was doing some design work on those systems, the level to which Roger Eric described his part selection, this is exactly the connector I use for all power supplies, and this is exactly what my output circuits use and stuff like that. It was really helpful to me getting started, right? I mean, so when you started this thing, why did you choose to support Euro rather than trying to do 5U stuff?
So I actually want to do both. I started with Euro as kind of a test of the business because I knew and know that the market for Euro is probably 10 times the market for 5U.
Probably right.
So I wanted to do, quote unquote, the easy one first. And Euro is a lot easier. I live in Portland, the land of Eurorack manufacturers. And every time you go to a bar, you meet one of your buddies who runs another business. So, it was very easy for me to, get to the same panel makers that make panels for, IntelliGel and the big guys because, I want things to look nice. I come from 5U where things look nice.
Right.
So it was a little easier to enter that. There were like some kind of questions that were answered, like jacks, use these jacks. IntelliGel designed them, do this, do that. The panels are just a piece of aluminum. That's very easy when you compare that to, a Moog format or MU format panel.
Right.
Where suddenly you've got the things, and that's actually been the biggest hindrance because most of my system, I do have some MU stuff. My live rack has 2 rows of MOTM and 2 rows of Euro, and most of my modular racks follow that format with 1 or 2 rows of 5U and then a couple rows of Euro, just hanging out side by side. MOTM, it's fairly easy to design for that. It's a piece of metal that is black and then screen printed.
Right.
So you can do that, but then, when I look at trying to do the MU stuff now, that ends up being a real concern because, it's not really worth it for me to do a run of anything less than 100. And I look at the cost of getting, those nice panels with the bent sides made for, like, let's say my mixer or a mult. It's like, well, geez, how much am I going to have to charge for that mixer? And suddenly it's not that appealing to do it. And there's also the fact that there's 1/4 inch inputs, which means even if I want to cut down on the wiring, I still need to use 2 PCBs. And then there's still some wiring between the, so it's just blah, 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 blah. And it goes on and on and on. So I chose Euro. Simple answer is I chose it because if the business was going to fail, I wanted to have it fail on the proper terms. And the second one was it was just easier. And I would really, really, really love to offer MU panels or have someone offer them for me, but I don't have enough faith in it yet. Maybe if I just did like the higher end modules like the filter or the looping ADSR, like that might work better because the pricing would be more in line. But I do agree with you. It is a wonderful format. I don't like 1/8 inch plugs. I use a ton of Euro. I think they're silly because I'm plugging 1/4 inch right next to it. And I love 1/4 inch jacks. They have a wonderful form factor. They have a wonderful feel. Like ergonomics to me is so important. And it's one of the things that has really gone away in the internet age. But like the feel of an instrument when you play it is so critically important to affecting your inspiration and your dreams, which is what fuels your inspiration. If you look at a panel, I'm looking at my 5E system right now, and like it's beautiful. I can just see my hand just turning that big old 5U knob, and I can't wait to do it. And you look at like some Euro panels, which are just tons of those little tiny black knobs all stuck as close together as they can. You're like, I don't even want to touch that thing.
Yeah, well, and especially you do live performance, especially in live performance, that kind of stuff ends up translating into a kind of performability and your desire to perform with the thing too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and there's technically, and this is such a small technically asterisk, you technically get better headroom out of 15 volts than you do out of 12. But yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like the performance factor, like, whenever people see pics of my setup, like, oh, 5U, aka way too big and not portable. And I'm always like, drummers carry so much more than this to every single gig. Every single gig.
That is a great point. Yeah.
It's not heavy. It's still just a metal faceplate and some PCBs. Like, it's light. And I love playing with it in my live sets. And I'll probably never not have 5U in there, because with that bigger knob, you just have a larger throw distance, to get from 0 to 100.
Yeah.
And it's great to feel like you have that control, even though, the knob's still turning the same resistance. You're taking longer to get there. And I don't know, there is something about the larger knobs that just feels great.
Well, and the other thing is, though, I mean, it is your instrument. And, I always think of guitarists. You go and see a guitarist, and unless they're just playing a bog standard, Strat or Les Paul, a lot of times, they'll have, they'll pick up their acoustic and it's some weirdo thing, or they'll have like an old Gretsch guitar, with gold leaf on it or something. You're like, why the hell do you need that? Why don't you just pull out a cheap Strat that you can replace tomorrow if you need to, right? Mm-hmm. And the answer is because it's the instrument, and sometimes the instrument inspires,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it better.
Yeah, right. Or else you maybe pick the wrong instrument, right?
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, that's what's, with like, when you talk about, wow, actually I won't go there, but there are a lot of mass marketed things that come out. Some of them are reproductions, mm-hmm. and, other things. And I check them out and I touch them, and I'm like, these faders feel bad to me.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. Like if I were mixing through this, I don't know, like something in the back of my mind, my reptile brain would feel how these faders feel, and I would start to mentally denigrate the quality of what I was doing.
Oh, yeah.
Just because, it's, and you can do amazing things with all kinds of gear. So you're doing the right thing, whoever you are, using whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Out there, all the angry emails I'm about to get. I support you in all of your musical endeavors, and I encourage you to chase your dreams. But yeah, I mean, the gear you use does matter so much, and it's regardless of the features. Like, features to me are so unimportant. Something with very few features that sounds good and feels good to use is something I'll always go towards than something that feels cheap and I have to dive through a bunch of menus.
Right. Indeed.
I have an Ambica in front of me, and I also have a Juno 6 behind me. So same feature set, 6 voice, analog. One has analog oscillators that are digitally controlled. I know the other is digital oscillators. I get it. But the Ambica has such a huge feature set compared to that Juno.
Right.
Massive feature set. But the filter is based off the same circuit. Uh-huh. Which one do I play?
Right.
The Juno. Every time.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah.
It doesn't even have MIDI. I still play it all the time. Way more than the Ambica.
Yeah, well, it's the thing. Again, it doesn't have to make logical sense. And it's why whenever I look back at like big mistakes I made in instrument purchases, it's always because I purchased the instrument based off of like a spreadsheet that I put together, right?
Yeah.
One that like says, well, this one has 6 oscillators, so surely it's better, right?
Exactly.
That's always like a good indicator that I'm about to like waste my money.
Right. I mean, we look at the Beatles, whether like you like the Beatles or not, their instruments had very few features.
Right.
And sounded very, very good.
Yeah, indeed.
And when I look at those mixers, I've never touched one of those mixers, but boy, I would like to.
Yeah, right.
So, would I get sick that I only have 4 channels? Maybe. But it sure is beautiful looking.
Indeed. Well, hey, man, our time is, I can't believe we already blew through all the time. But before I let you go, I'm I'm curious about one thing. So right at this top, you said one of the things that you did when you put AI synthesis together is you wanted to make the company that you wished for when you were getting started.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious, what's something that you haven't done yet that you really want to do in order to further that dream?
I don't know. I get a lot of really heartwarming emails from people who I was their first DIY experience.
Mm-hmm.
So from that perspective, I would say I'm living the dream, because every time I get one of those emails, it melts my heart. Like, I feel so good about it.
Right.
I would love to put out a voice, a full voice. As much as I tell myself I don't want to do any oscillators, I don't know. I guess I would. I mean, there's actually some fairly famous people using my stuff. I don't know. I guess if I saw it on like the Oscars or something, it'd blow my mind. But I don't even actually care about that. So I don't know how to answer your question. This is a very good question, though.
Yeah. Well, is there like one of the things that I feel like is when I go on your site, I see that you're almost as driven by teaching as you are by selling gear, right? I mean, is there anything like on the teaching part of it that you wish you either, I mean, maybe it's even something that you don't feel like you have the skills to do, but you wish you could explain better?
Oh yeah. I mean, I wish I had the knowledge. And your listeners are saying, well, go take an electric quartz, idiot. And like, I know I have a day job, guys. Like, I can't do that. Like, I can't just go to college right now. I definitely wish I had more of the knowledge. A lot of times putting out a module is a little frightening because, I know it works and I know basically why it works. I might not be able to do the math on why it works.
Right.
But,
right.
I know essentially why it works, but I also know, I was talking with another maker the other day. I can't remember his company. I think he's in Canada, and his documentation is amazing. It's like an electro notes manual, like you get his filter, you're getting like 10, it's like those the MOTM modules used to get, right? Where there's like 10 pages of documentation that come with this thing.
Right. Like a book. Yeah.
A book. Yeah. And it's like, would I ever read it? Probably not, but it's cool that it's there. I love that the thought and energy went behind that kind of documentation, and I can do a certain amount of documentation up to that point. But at some point in time, it's going to fall apart. I probably should just challenge myself to, because then I would actually learn the things. So there's a little Post-it note for me to write. But I would love for the web design to be like, it's pretty good, especially for a DIY synthesizer site. But, like having cool little overlays and stuff would be cool. I am trying to, like, if you go to the filter and you look at the build guide, it's different than the other ones because it's a checklist, which is actually the checklist I use when I build a thing. So I'm trying to get that together. I wish there were a lot more guides. Like, I've got a to-do list with 30 articles that I want to write, and there's just not enough time. So I want to write all those things. I want someone to be able to learn everything in the world about DIY synth from my site. Then I'll win. How about that?
There you go.
Unreachable goal.
Yeah, I like that. Well, aim high, you might hit it, right?
Who knows?
Well, I strongly hope that you at least take a good swing at that goal. I think it's great. I am inspired. I kind of walked away from DIY because of some kind of rough experiences myself. Mm-hmm. And I look at your site and I'm inspired by it. I mean, I'm inspired to like pull the soldering iron out of the garage and get to building, because it's not only exciting to think of like getting new modules and stuff, but I do really understand sort of the joy that comes with getting something working and being part of. It's almost like you become part of a group by doing that. But with that, we are going to wrap this up. I'm going to let you have the rest of your evening. Thank you so much for taking the time to have the chat. It was really great.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me and letting me ramble on.
It was a lot of fun, man. I appreciate it. With that, we'll say goodbye.
Bye.
Many thanks to Abraham for having a chat. If you are not familiar with this stuff, you ought to be. It's a really great way to get into DIY, and there's just some really great modules. So check them out. If you have any questions, you can drop me a line, ddg@cycling74.com or ddg@20objects.com or darwin.gross@gmail.com. I answer to them all. So drop me a line. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure you share this with your friends. And do me a favor, if you get a chance, just drop me a line and tell me where you listen. I've actually gotten a lot of noise from people lately that are listening on Spotify. I'd like to have a sense of where the listenership is coming from. So if you could do me that favor, I'd really appreciate it. And with that, I'm going to let you go. Have a blast. Bye.